Pacific Rim.
They came from deep beneath the Pacific.
Version.
If you want to stop them, you have to understand.
Mind melding through memories with the body.
There he is, and take out the vermin. Awesome.
Or we could just blow them.
500 tons of awesome.
We started winning. They never considered we would run.
What happens when giant monsters rise from the ocean and the only hope is massive fighting robots? All get ready for insane kaiju battles, epic Jaegers, and non-stop action in Pacific Rim. 2013 Watch K Live Facts for the movie review, crazy facts, and hidden details you probably missed. Pacific Rim is a 2013 American military science fiction movie packed with giant robots, massive monsters, and non-stop action. The movie was directed by Guillermo del Toro, with the screenplay written by Travis Beacham and Guillermo del Toro based on a story by Beacham. It is the first movie in the Pacific Rim franchise. The movie stars Charlie Hunnam, Idris Elba, Rinko Kikuchi, Charlie Day, Robert Kaczynski, Max Martini, and Ron Perlman. The story takes place in the future when Earth is fighting a terrifying war against giant sea monsters known as Kaiju. These enormous creatures come from another dimension through a mysterious portal located deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. As the monsters keep showing up and destroying cities, humanity realizes that normal weapons just aren't enough to stop them. So, countries around the world join forces and create giant humanoid robots called Jaegers. These massive machines are basically giant fighting robots built to go head to head with the kaiju. But controlling a Jaeger isn't something one person can easily handle. Each robot is controlled by two pilots who have to connect their minds through a special mental link called the drift. This connection allows both pilots to share memories, thoughts, and feelings while working together to control the giant machine. The movie focuses on humanity's desperate fight to survive as the kaiju become stronger and more dangerous. The Jaegers become Earth's main line of defense, putting their giant fists, weapons, and technology up against monsters that can wipe out entire cities. As the war continues, the pilots have to deal with huge risks, personal losses, and the pressure of knowing that the fate of humanity could depend on them. Filming for the movie started on November 14, 2011, in Toronto, and continued until April 2012. The movie was produced by Legendary Pictures and distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures. It hit theaters on July 12, 2013 and was released in several formats including 3D, Real-D 3D, IMAX 3D, and 4DX. When it came out, Pacific Rim received mostly positive reviews from critics. People praised the performances, Guillermo del Toro's direction, the storyline, huge action scenes, visual effects, music, and the movie's old school nostalgic style. A lot of fans also loved how the movie felt like a giant tribute to classic monster movies, Japanese kaiju stories, giant robot anime, and mecha entertainment. Even though the movie didn't perform as strongly as expected at the box office in the United States, it did much better in international markets. Because of its strong performance around the world, the movie eventually became a box office success. Pacific Rim made around $411 million worldwide, with about $136 million coming from China alone, which became its biggest market. The movie also became Guillermo del Toro's most commercially successful film at that time. One of the biggest reasons Pacific Rim became so popular was its love for giant monsters and giant robots. The movie clearly pays tribute to kaiju movies, mecha stories, and anime. Instead of trying to make the robots feel small or realistic, the movie goes all in on the idea of enormous machines fighting gigantic monsters in the middle of cities and oceans. That's a huge part of what made the movie stand out. The movie later received a sequel called Pacific Rim Uprising, which was released on March 23rd, 2018. Universal Pictures handled the distribution of the sequel. The follow up continued the story of the Jaegers and the ongoing battle between humanity and the kaiju. In the near future, giant alien monsters called kaiju suddenly rise from a mysterious portal deep inside a huge crack beneath the Pacific Ocean. These massive creatures start attacking cities along the coast, and the world quickly falls into a brutal war. Millions of people are killed, and humanity burns through its resources trying to stop the monsters. To fight back, humans create a new kind of weapon called the Jaeger. These are enormous humanoid fighting robots built specifically to battle the kaiju. But controlling a Jaeger is way too much for one person. So each robot is controlled by two pilots whose minds are connected through a neural link called the drift. This connection allows both pilots to share the mental pressure and memories needed to control the massive machine. Without this system, the mental strain would be too much for a single pilot to handle. At first, the Jaegers are extremely successful. They manage to stop several kaiju attacks and give humanity a chance to fight back. But things soon get worse. The kaiju begin coming through the portal more often, and every new monster seems to be stronger and better prepared to fight the Jaegers. As the attacks continue, the Jaegers become less effective. Earth's governments start losing faith in the program. After 5 years of fighting, the Jaeger program is officially shut down. Instead of building more giant robots, the world's governments decide to spend their resources constructing massive walls along the coast to protect the cities. But that plan doesn't work for long. The kaiju attacks become more frequent, and the giant monsters destroy the walls almost as easily as they destroyed the cities. Meanwhile, Jaegers are being destroyed faster than new ones can be built. Eventually, only four Jaegers are still operational. These four remaining machines are sent to Hong Kong, where they are ordered to protect the unfortified coastline while the giant wall is still under construction. Stacker Pentecost, the commander of the Jaeger forces, realizes that humanity can't keep fighting the kaiju forever. He comes up with a risky plan to end the war once and for all. His idea is to send a nuclear weapon into the breach, the portal, at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, where the kaiju enter Earth's world and destroy it from the inside. Previous attempts have failed, but Pentecost believes this might be humanity's last real shot. Back in 2020, brothers Yancey and Raleigh Becket are piloting the American Jaeger Gypsy Danger. Their mission is to defend Anchorage from a Category 3 kaiju known as Knife Head. The battle quickly turns into a nightmare. Knifehead seriously damages Gypsy Danger and kills Yancey. Raleigh is suddenly left alone inside the Jaeger. Despite the incredible pressure and pain of losing his brother, Raleigh keeps fighting. He manages to kill Knifehead and somehow pilots the damaged Gypsy Danger all the way back to shore by himself. After collapsing from exhaustion, Raleigh wakes up and realizes he can't deal with the emotional trauma of losing his brother. The experience completely breaks him. He leaves the Jaeger program and disappears from the fight. Years later, Raleigh is working on the massive coastal walls instead of piloting Jaegers. But Stacker Pentecost tracks him down and asks him to come back. Pentecost convinces Raleigh to return to the Jaeger program and pilot Gypsy Danger again, the same machine he once controlled with his brother Yancey. Raleigh agrees and is recruited for Pentecost's final mission to destroy the breach. At this point, only four Jaegers are still operational. The first is the refurbished Gypsy Danger, which Raleigh will pilot. The second is the Russian Jaeger Cherno Alpha, controlled by Russian pilots Sasha and Alexis Kaidanovsky. The third is the Chinese Jaeger Crimson Typhoon, controlled by the Wei Tang triplets. Because the three brothers have an unusually strong connection, they can work together extremely well inside the Jaeger. The fourth is the Australian Jaeger striker Eureka, piloted by father and son team Chuck Hansen and Hercules Hansen. Tendo Choi is also part of the operation. He is a skilled Jaeger technician of Chinese and South American background who helps keep the machines running. When Raleigh arrives in Hong Kong, he begins testing possible co-pilots. Finding the right partner is extremely important because the stronger the mental connection between two pilots, the better they can control a Jaeger during combat. Raleigh meets Mako Mori, the director of the Jaeger restoration program. Almost immediately, Raleigh feels that he has a powerful connection with her. He decides that Mako is the person he wants to pilot Gypsy Danger with, but Pentecost refuses. He doesn't believe Mako is ready for real combat. Raleigh argues with Pentecost, demanding to know why Mako can't join him. Pentecost finally reveals the truth. He adopted Mako when she was a young girl after her parents were killed during a devastating kaiju attack. Pentecost knows exactly how much emotional damage Mako has suffered, and he doesn't want to put her through another traumatic experience. Still, Raleigh and Mako eventually get their chance to test Gypsy Danger together, but their first test run almost turns into a disaster. While drifting with Raleigh, Mako suddenly becomes trapped inside a painful childhood memory of the kaiju attack that killed her family. She loses control of herself and accidentally activates Gypsy Danger's main weapon, the plasma cannon, while they are still inside the hangar. The weapon nearly fires and could have caused massive damage. Pentecost immediately removes Mako and Raleigh from active combat. At the same time, a new kaiju attack begins in Hong Kong. Two kaiju appear together, and the remaining Jaegers are sent out to stop them. The situation quickly becomes a total disaster. The kaiju attack with incredible strength. Crimson Typhoon is destroyed. Cherno Alpha is also taken down. Striker Eureka is badly damaged and disabled by an electromagnetic attack, with almost everyone else out of the fight. Pentecost has no choice but to send Raleigh and Mako into battle. The two climb into Gypsy's Danger and head out for one last stand. This time, they manage to push the kaiju back and survive the battle. Meanwhile, Pentecost meets with two kaiju experts, Dr. Newton Geisler and Dr. Hermann Gottlieb. Hermann studies the strange behavior of the kaiju and warns that the breach is becoming more stable. If that happens, even more kaiju could come through. Dr. Newton Geisler is obsessed with learning how the kaiju think. He creates a special machine that allows him to connect his mind to a piece of a kaiju's brain. The experiment is extremely dangerous and almost kills him. But Newton discovers something shocking. The kaiju aren't simply random monsters. They are biological weapons created and sent to Earth as part of an invasion. Their ultimate purpose is to wipe out humanity and make the planet available for another species to take over. Newton realizes that the kaiju are connected through a kind of shared hive mind. With Pentecost's permission, Newton decides that he needs an entire kaiju brain so he can study it properly. To get one, he goes to Hannibal Chow, a powerful businessman involved in the illegal trade of kaiju body parts. Chow isn't exactly happy to see Newton. He explains that by connecting his mind to the kaiju, Newton may have accidentally allowed the creatures to notice him. Newton then realizes that because the drift works both ways, the kaiju were able to access his mind too. That means they now know where he is. Two new kaiju, Leatherback and Otachi, arrive in Hong Kong at the same time. Their mission is simple: find Newton. The remaining Jaegers are sent out to stop them. Otachi attacks Crimson Typhoon and destroys it. Leatherback takes down Cherno Alpha and then releases a powerful electromagnetic pulse that shuts down Striker Eureka. The EMP attack also seriously injures Hercules Hansen. Gypsy Danger is the only Jaeger that isn't affected by the EMP because of its older analog technology and nuclear powered system. Pentecost sends Gypsy into the fight. Raleigh and Mako face both monsters and manage to turn the battle around. Gypsy Danger kills Leatherback and then takes down Otachi. After the battle, Hannibal Chow and his crew arrive to collect valuable kaiju body parts. But then they discover something completely unexpected. Otachi is pregnant. Before Chow can safely take the kaiju apart, the newborn kaiju bursts out. The creature attacks Chow and his crew. In the chaos, the baby kaiju eats Chow. Newton and Herman manage to get access to the newborn kaiju's brain before it dies. They connect to it and discover something incredibly important. They learn the secret behind how the kaiju use the breach and how the portal controls their movement between worlds. Now humanity finally has a way to enter the breach and destroy it. The remaining Jaeger forces regroup for their final mission. Before the mission begins, Pentecost tells Raleigh a secret he has been hiding. Pentecost is suffering from severe radiation poisoning. Years earlier, he piloted an early generation Jaeger by himself to save a young Mako during a kaiju attack. The radiation from the machine damaged his body badly. Because of this, he can no longer pilot a Jaeger the way he once could. But with Hercules injured during the Hong Kong battle, Pentecost has no choice. He takes control of Striker Eureka. Raleigh and Mako prepare Gypsy Danger for the final mission, while Pentecost and Chuck prepare Striker Eureka. The plan is to travel down into the Pacific Ocean, reach the breach, and destroy it. Newton and Herman explain that the breach has a security system. The portal won't simply let anything pass through. To enter it, they need to make the system believe they are kaiju. The only way to do that is by using kaiju genetic material. As the Jaegers approach the breach, two kaiju appear to guard it: Scanner and Raiju. But then something even bigger appears. A Category 5 kaiju called Slattern emerges from the breach. Slattern is the biggest and most powerful kaiju humanity has ever seen. Before Raleigh, Mako, Pentecost, and Chuck can fully understand what they're facing, the three kaiju attack. The battle is brutal. Gypsy Danger manages to kill Raiju, but the machine is badly damaged in the process. Striker Eureka fights Scanner while Gypsy struggles against Slattern. Pentecost and Chuck realize that they may not survive. They make the ultimate sacrifice. They detonate Striker Eureka's nuclear weapons, destroying themselves and killing Scanner. The explosion badly injures Slattern, giving Raleigh and Mako their opening. Gypsy Danger attacks Slattern and finally kills the massive Category 5 kaiju. But the mission isn't over. Raleigh and Mako use Gypsy Danger to ride Slaton's body down into the breach. Their plan is to get through the portal and overload Gypsy's nuclear reactor on the other side, turning the Jaeger into a massive bomb. The journey is extremely dangerous because Gypsy Danger has already taken a huge beating. As they reach the other side, Raleigh knows they may not make it back. He ejects Mako from the damaged Jaeger and sends her towards safety. Then Raleigh manually overrides Gypsy Danger's safety systems and prepares to sacrifice himself. Gypsy Danger's nuclear reactor overloads. The giant Jaeger explodes on the other side of the breach, destroying the portal and killing the alien creatures responsible for sending the Kaiju to Earth. The breach collapses. The invasion is finally stopped. Raleigh survives the explosion and eventually reaches the surface of the ocean. Mako also survives, and the two are reunited after completing their mission. Humanity has finally won the war, but there is one more surprise. Hannibal Chow isn't actually dead. After being swallowed by the newborn kaiju, Chow cuts his way out of its stomach and somehow survives the whole crazy situation. The kaiju invasion is over. The breach is destroyed, and Earth finally gets a chance to rebuild after years of fighting giant monsters. Casting Charlie Hunnam as Raleigh Becket formed the emotional core of the casting for Pacific Rim. Guillermo del Toro had encountered Hunnam years earlier during the casting process for Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. Hunnam had been under serious consideration for the role of Prince Nuada, going so far as prosthetic tests and screen tests alongside Anna Walton. Del Toro ultimately chose Luke Goss because Hunnam's broader bone structure did not match the finer features he wanted for the twin aesthetic with Walton's character. Even then, Del Toro told Hunnam he intended to work with him as soon as the right project appeared. When Pacific Rim moved forward, the conversation with legendary Pictures president Thomas Tull was remarkably brief. Del Toro named Hunnam for Raleigh Beckett. Tull simply agreed that Charlie was cool. That was the extent of the studio level discussion. Del Toro described Hunnam as possessing an earnest, honest nature, the kind of actor a male audience member would want to have a few beers with. He saw an earthy quality and a pure heart that matched Raleigh's arc. A pilot broken by the loss of his brother Yancey, withdrawn from the fight, then pulled back into service. Hunnam himself noted that the character's journey felt relatable, falling down, losing the will to continue, and finding reasons to stand up again. The director and actor met at Del Toro's well-known man cave, talked for hours, and Hunnam committed before even reading a full script, citing trust in the filmmaker's imagination and ability to build dimensional worlds. Hunnam's prior work on Sons of Anarchy, combined with the earlier Hellboy connection through mutual acquaintance Ron Perlman, kept him on Del Toro's radar. Physical preparation for the Concord sequences demanded endurance. The specialized suits and gimbal mounted cockpit required actors to perform dynamic movements while harnessed, simulating the physical strain of piloting a Jaeger. Hunnam's athletic background and commitment to the physicality helped sell the idea that the audience was inside the machine with the pilots rather than watching pure motion capture performance. Idris Elba as Marshall Stacker Pentecost represented a deliberate shift away from more conventional leading man archetypes. Del Toro had initially modeled aspects of the story on Top Gun and Hoosiers. Tom Cruise was approached for the Pentecost role. Discussions advanced far enough that a karaoke scene was planned for the character, and Cruise expressed interest. Scheduling conflicts, Cruise was moving into oblivion, and deal complications prevented the collaboration. Del Toro has noted that the two had developed multiple projects over the years without ever completing one together. With Cruise unavailable, the director turned to Alba, describing him as a god of an actor capable of carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Del Toro specifically wanted someone who could deliver dense dialogue with authority while conveying internal doubt and the burden of command. Watching Elba in Luther reinforced the sense that the actor could embody a larger than life figure who still felt human, almost sculptural in presence, with the turmoil of humanity visible in his eyes. Elba prepared by studying footage of political leaders such as David Cameron and Barack Obama, as well as performances by Russell Crowe in Gladiator and Mel Gibson in Braveheart. The character was rewritten to fit Elba's strengths rather than remaining a maverick style hotshot pilot. Del Toro needed an actor who could convincingly order Charlie Hunnam's Raleigh to sit down and listen, someone whose presence would dominate a room without relying on conventional square jawed marine imagery. Elba's portrayal emphasized a father figure dynamic with Mako Mori and a steely resolve that made the final sacrificial decisions land with weight. The physical demands of the suits applied here as well, though Pentecost screen time balanced command center authority with cockpit sequences. Rinko Kikuchi as Mako Mori brought a carefully constructed female lead who was never positioned as a romantic or decorative figure. Del Toro was explicit that Mako would not appear in cut-off shots or function as a sex kitten sidekick. She needed equal force to the male pilots. Kikuchi learned that Del Toro was seeking a Japanese actress for a Hager pilot role and contacted her Babel director Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, who was friends with Del Toro. Iñárritu facilitated the introduction. Kikuchi traveled to Toronto for the audition, extremely nervous. Del Toro sensed her tension and suggested they get ice cream first. Vanilla for her, chocolate for him, before running scenes from an early draft of the script. The ice cream break relaxed her enough to perform. She received the offer roughly 2 months later. Kikuchi's preparation included months in the restrictive pilot suits, while other actors described physical exhaustion and even injury from the harnesses and gimbal work. Kikuchi reportedly never complained. When asked her secret, she said she thought of gummy bears and flowers. Del Toro later adopted a version of that mental technique. Mana Ashida portrayed young Mako in the flashback sequences that established the character's trauma and her bond with Pentecost. The casting of Kikuchi also aligned with Del Toro's long-standing appreciation for Japanese cinema and kaiju traditions. Her presence helped root the film's homage to those genres in authentic performance rather than surface level exoticism. Chemistry tests with Hunnam were critical because the drift sequences required the actors to convey shared memory and synchronized movement. Their pairing sold the idea of two damaged people becoming a single effective unit inside Gypsy Danger. Charlie Day, as Dr. Newt Geisler, provided the film's primary source of eccentric energy and comic relief that never fully undercut the stakes. Del Toro, a dedicated fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, cast Day largely on the strength of a specific monologue. In the episode Charlie Kelly, King of the Rats, Day delivers a haunted, character driven speech about slaughtering a nest of rats and the moral weight of the act. Del Toro responded to the shading humor arising from genuine emotion and lament rather than broad clowning. He wanted someone who could move between levity and real peril when Newt's research pulled him into the path of the kaiju. Day has said that Del Toro's enthusiasm and knowledge of film language exceeded that of any director he had previously worked with. The two bonded quickly. Day, already an admirer of Pan's Labyrinth, found the collaboration creatively freeing. Del Toro allowed improvisation and shot Day's scenes with multiple cameras so the actor could move freely. Costume and character design reinforce Newt's personality. Tattoos, a leather jacket, and accessories that suggested a man trying to project a cooler, more dangerous self image than his actual scientific persona. They viewed the character as a man child extension of Del Toro's own boyish passion for monsters. The role demanded that Day hold his own in scenes opposite both the action-oriented pilots and the more grounded Bern Gorman as Hermann Gottlieb. Their scientific bickering became a highlight, balancing exposition with personality. Day's casting also signaled Del Toro's willingness to pull performers from unexpected places rather than defaulting to established blockbuster faces. Ron Perlman, as Hannibal Chow, continued one of cinema's most durable director-actor partnerships. Perlman and Del Toro had collaborated extensively on the Hellboy films and other projects. Show was originally conceived with a different ethnicity in mind. Del Toro later decided to reinvent the black market kaiju parts dealer as a larger than life invention, someone who adopts a flamboyant persona that does not match his actual background. Perlman embraced the opportunity to play a character defined by gold teeth, elaborate fashion, and a complete lack of conventional morality. On set, Perlman observed that Del Toro had grown more specific and forceful in his direction, compared with earlier collaborations while still retaining a collaborative spirit. Chow's scenes with Days Nude supplied some of the film's darkest humor and visual flair, particularly the black market warehouse sequences and the post-credits stinger in which Chow cuts his way out of a kaiju infant. Supporting pilots and Shatterdome personnel rounded out the ensemble with deliberate attention to international representation and physical credibility. Max Martini and Robert Kaczynski, often credited as Rob Kaczynski, played the father-son Hansen team of Huck and Chuck, pilots of Striker Eureka. They were among the first actors into the cornpod sets and suits, helping refine the practical performance language for the rest of the cast. Their dynamic, gruff, paternal concern, colliding with cocky, youthful aggression, provided a counterpoint to the Raleigh Mako partnership. Clifton Collins Jr. as Tendo Choi handled the technical nerve center role with dry competence, grounding the high-tech jargon. Bern Gorman as Dr. Herman Gottlieb matched Day's energy with precise, irritable intellectualism, creating a double act that humanized the scientific side of the war effort. Diego Clattenhoff appeared as Yancey Becket in the opening sequences that established Raleigh's trauma. Heather Dorksen and Robert Mayet portrayed the Russian pilots Sasha and Alexis Kaidanovsky of Cherno Alpha, contributing to the multinational texture of the Jaeger program. Ellen McLean provided the voice of Gypsy Danger's AI, a casting choice that carried quiet resonance for audiences familiar with her work as GLaDOS in the Portal games. Child performers Mana Ashida, Young Mako, and others filled the flashback and peripheral roles that expanded the emotional geography of the world. Additional supporting players included Larry Joe Campbell, Brad William Henke, Santiago Segura, Joe Ping, Milton Barnes, and numerous UN representatives and Shatterdome personnel who populated the bureaucratic and operational layers of the story. Casting directors and process operated under Marjorie Simkin as primary casting director with Robin D. Cook handling Toronto casting and Zamaret Kleiman overseeing extras. The production's decision to shoot principally at Pinewood Toronto studios meant the casting team needed performers who could handle both the dramatic requirements and the sustained physical demands of the practical cockpit sets. Del Toro's approach to directing actors on this film differed from his earlier, more mannered work on Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone. He deliberately loosened control, allowing more breathing room and improvisation, especially with Day. Multiple cameras captured spontaneous movement inside the conpods. The suits themselves, created by legacy effects, were engineered so that actors felt the weight and restriction of the machines rather than performing in pure motion capture isolation. This practical philosophy influenced every casting decision. The performers had to look and move as if they were genuinely linked to multi story robots. Del Toro's broader casting philosophy prioritized actors he wanted to hear deliver the dialogue and whose faces and physicalities would feel fresh to audiences rather than preloaded with blockbuster associations. He sought performers who could convey sincerity, authority, vulnerability, and eccentricity without tipping into caricature. Chemistry between the drift partners was non negotiable because the mental link concept required visible synchronization and emotional transparency. International flavor was essential to the Pan Pacific Defense Corps concept. The inclusion of Japanese, Russian, Chinese, Australian, and American pilots reflected the global nature of the threat. The result was an ensemble that felt assembled for character and capability rather than pure marquee value, even as high profile names like Elba and Hunnam anchored the marketing. Physical and technical preparation further shaped the final roster. Actors spent extended periods in the harnessed comfort sets mounted on gimbals that simulated the motion of combat. Stunt coordinators and fight choreographers worked closely with the principal cast so that the punches and movements visible inside the cockpits would translate convincingly to the CG Jaegers outside. Del Toro and the visual effects team at Industrial Light and Magic ultimately preferred that actors move at normal human speed. The editorial and animation processes could then adjust the sense of scale and mass. This decision placed additional pressure on casting choices. Performers needed the stamina and coordination to deliver repeated takes of intense physical work while remaining emotionally present for the drift sequences and dialogue. The supporting scientific and black market characters received equal care. Day and Gorman's verbal sparring required performers comfortable with rapid, technical dialogue that still felt character driven. Perlman's Chow demanded an actor who could dominate a scene through presence and costume as much as through lines. Smaller roles, construction workers, UN officials, Shatterdome technicians were filled with actors who could populate the world without drawing focus away from the central conflicts. Voice work for the AI systems and additional background performances completed the sonic and visual texture. Throughout the process, Del Toro's personal relationships and long term observations of actors proved decisive. The Hellboy connection with Hunnam and Pearlman, the It Is Always Sunny fandom that led to Day, the Iñárritu introduction that brought Kikuchi, and the strategic pivot from Cruz to Elba all illustrate a director who treated casting as both practical problem solving and an extension of his own taste. The final ensemble delivered the sincerity, humor, authority, and physical commitment required to make an audience believe in giant robots and interdimensional monsters sharing the same frame. Every major role was filled with an actor whose specific qualities, Hanam's earnestness, Elba's gravitas, Kikuchi's quiet intensity, Day's shaded comedy, Pullman's theatrical invention, aligned with the tonal and narrative needs of the story. The result stands as a clear example of casting driven by character fit, collaborative history, and a willingness to look beyond the most obvious commercial choices. Production development and pre-production road to Pacific Rim began years before Guillermo del Toro ever attached his name to the project. In February 2006, industry reports indicated that screenwriter Travis Bicham had been tapped to direct a fantasy screenplay Del Toro had written, titled Killing on Carnival Row. That project never came together, but the connection between the two men, born of that shelved endeavor, would eventually lead somewhere far more consequential. It was in the following year, 2007, that Beecham first conceived the idea that would grow into Pacific Rim. The screenwriter has described walking along the beach near the Santa Monica Pier when the image struck him, a colossal robot locked in combat with an equally colossal monster, the two of them materializing almost like ghosts out of a coastal haze. He later refined the concept further by imagining that each robot would require two pilots working in tandem, which raised an obvious dramatic question in his mind. What would happen to the surviving pilot if their counterpart were killed in action? Beecham realized he had stumbled upon more than just a monster versus robot premise. He had found a vehicle for exploring loss, the process of moving forward after tragedy, and the particular guilt carried by those who survive when others do not. With that emotional through line, he began writing. The project moved from concept to industry reality on May 28, 2010, when it was reported that Legendary Pictures had acquired Becham's film treatment, a detailed 25-page document that had by then been given the title Pacific Rim. This was a substantial vote of confidence in a specification that, at the time, existed only as a treatment rather than a full screenplay. But Legendary's interest set the wheels in motion for what would eventually become one of the most technically ambitious blockbusters of its era. Guillermo del Toro's involvement did not begin with Pacific Rim as his primary directorial focus. On July 28, 2010, it was announced that Del Toro would next direct a big budget adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness for Universal Studios, with James Cameron attached as a producer and Tom Cruise attached to star. Around this same period, Del Toro met with executives at Legendary Pictures to discuss a possible collaboration, and during those conversations, he became intrigued by Beecham's Pacific Rim treatment, which he later described as still being little more than a compact pitch at that stage. Recognizing the scheduling conflict this created, Del Toro struck a deal with Legendary. He would produce and co-write Pacific Rim while he directed the Lovecraft adaptation for Universal, and he would only step in to direct Pacific Rim himself if At the Mountains of Madness fell apart. That is precisely what happened. On March 7, 2011, it was reported that Universal had decided not to move forward with At the Mountains of Madness. largely because Del Toro was unwilling to compromise on either the film's roughly $150 million budget or its intended R rating. The cancellation hit Del Toro hard on a personal level. He later reflected that the experience was unlike anything that had happened to him before in his career, admitting that he found himself crying over the course of that weekend and describing the feeling as one of genuine devastation rather than mere professional disappointment. He said he was, in his own words, weeping for the movie he would no longer get to make. Yet the turnaround was remarkably swift. The Lovecraft project collapsed on a Friday, and by the following Monday, Del Toro had signed on to direct Pacific Rim. Once committed to directing, Del Toro spent roughly a year working alongside Beecham to develop the screenplay, ultimately earning a co-writing credit alongside the original screenwriter. Del Toro used this process to inject ideas he had long wanted to see explored within the giant monster genre, including a sequence depicting the birth of a kaiju and a scene depicting a kaiju attack as witnessed through the eyes of a child. Beyond the credited writing partnership between Bicham and Del Toro, the script passed through several other hands during development. Neil Cross, the creator of the Idris Elba-led television drama Luther and the writer of the Del Toro-produced horror film Mama, contributed an uncredited rewrite. Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan, who had caught Del Toro's attention with a spec script called Monstropolis, were also brought in to perform uncredited work on the screenplay. Drew Pearce rounded out the list of writers who did uncredited work on the script. Casting decisions during pre-production shaped the eventual character of the film considerably. Del Toro's vision for the role of Raleigh Becket ultimately went to Charlie Hunnam, but the director's process for finding his lead reveals a good deal about what he wanted from the character. Del Toro explained that upon meeting Hunnam, he sensed an earnest and honest quality in the actor, the kind of relatable everyman charisma that would make an ordinary viewer feel an instinctive kinship with him. The sort of guy, and in Del Toro's estimation, that audiences would want to share a drink with, someone possessed of what the director called an earthy quality. Hunnam, for his part, described Raleigh's arc as one defined by catastrophic personal loss at the outset of the story, a loss so profound it strips away both his sense of self worth and his will to keep fighting, until Mako Mori and Stacker Pentecost helped draw him back into the fold for one final push against the kaiju threat. Hunnam considered this a broadly relatable journey, noting that everyone experiences moments where they fall down and lose the desire to get back up again, yet ultimately must find the strength to do so regardless of the difficulty involved. Interestingly, Hunnam had previously been in the running for a role in Del Toro's earlier film Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, playing the character Prince Nuada, though that casting did not come to pass. In the finished film, Paul Michael Wyers plays a young Raleigh in flashback sequences. For the pivotal role of Marshall Stacker Pentecost, Del Toro's first choice was not Idris Elba at all but Tom Cruise. The director had initially envisioned the character in the mold of a maverick style hotshot, and Cruz reportedly engaged in negotiations and briefly accepted the part before ultimately withdrawing over disagreements related to pay and scheduling conflicts. With Cruz out of the picture, Del Toro turned to Idris Elba, and his reasoning for the change in direction was notably deliberate. Given how dialogue heavy the script had become compared to his earlier work, Del Toro wanted an actor with enough natural authority to convincingly command Hunnam's character, someone who could believably tell Raleigh Becket to sit down and listen. He wanted to avoid casting a stereotypical blonde, square jawed Marine archetype and instead sought an actor who could convey the weight of the world resting on his shoulders, a quality he identified in Elba's performance as the title character in the television series Luther, whom Del Toro likened to a man doing penance for the sins of all humanity. Del Toro further compared Elba's screen presence to a Rodin sculpture, describing him as an actor capable of embodying humanity on a larger than life scale, someone whose eyes could carry all of humankind's turmoil while still conveying internal doubt. To prepare for the role, Elba studied footage of real world political figures David Cameron and Barack Obama, as well as watching Russell Crowe's performance in Gladiator and Mel Gibson's performance in Braveheart. Rinko Kikuchi was cast as Mako Mori, a character Del Toro built specifically to stand as an equal counterpart to the film's male leads. The director has spoken about being deliberate in constructing the movie so that its female lead would carry the same dramatic force as her male counterparts, explicitly avoiding any temptation to reduce her to a sexualized object by dressing her in revealing clothing. Instead, he wanted an earnest and genuinely drawn character. Del Toro also noted that the physically demanding shoot, particularly the harnesses required for the Jaeger cockpit sequences, left most of the cast physically exhausted. Yet Kikuchi was the one performer who never complained about the toll it took on her body. When Del Toro asked her how she managed to endure the process so well, she reportedly told him that she simply thought about gummy bears and flowers, an approach the director said he has since tried to adopt in his own life. Mana Ashida plays a young Mako in the film's flashback sequences. Charlie Day took on the role of Dr. Newt Geisler, the eccentric kaiju obsessed scientist who provides much of the film's comic relief alongside Bern Gorman's character. Day has described his role along with Gormans as offering a bit of levity amid the film's larger battles between man and monster, while also noting that his character eventually gets pulled into genuine danger as the plot progresses, shifting the tone from comedic to something closer to horror. He observed that while the rest of the cast looked the part of chiseled action heroes, in their pilot suits. His character was meant to be more of an everyman figure, flawed, arrogant, and a deliberate tonal counterpoint to the more traditionally heroic Jaeger pilots. Del Toro conceived of Geisler's personality as something akin to a celebrity chef, complete with tattoos and an outsized personality to match. The director has also explained that Day was cast in part because of his performance in a memorable episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, in which the actor delivered an extended, deeply committed monologue about hunting rats in a basement, a scene Del Toro found genuinely funny, precisely because they played it from a place of real, grounded character work rather than broad comedy, convincing the director that they could shade a performance between humor and pathos within the same scene. Trek Buccino portrays a young version of Newt, Ron Perlman, appearing in his fifth collaboration with Del Toro, was cast as the black market kaiju organ dealer Hannibal Chow. Perlman has offered a candid account of how the character was conceived, suggesting that the role was likely written with an actor of a different ethnic background in mind before Del Toro landed on the idea of transforming Chow into more of an invented persona, someone who has essentially assumed an entirely different identity while remaining underneath it all recognizably the actor playing him. Perlman noted that this added a layer of larger than life theatricality to the character since he was in effect playing a fabricated persona built atop something close to his own origins, which he felt made the character even more of a charming fraud, someone deliberately hard to pin down. Del Toro has said that once an actor like Ron Perlman, hailing from Brooklyn, is cast as a character named Hannibal Chow who deals in black market organs, no further explanation is required. The casting itself does most of the storytelling work, whereas a different actor in the role would have demanded much more backstory to make the character land. The bird tattoos visible on Chow's fingers are meant to signal his history as a gangster. And within the film's own mythology, Chow explains that he took his name from a historical figure he admires, as well as his second favorite Sichuan restaurant back in Brooklyn. Del Toro has cited Burt Lancaster's performance in Elmer Gantry as an inspiration while writing the character. Robert Kaczynski was cast as Chuck Hansen, the brash Australian Jaeger pilot considered among the finest fighters remaining in the anti-kaiju resistance. As a self-described fan of science fiction, Kaczynski recalled his immediate reaction to the project's concept being one of enthusiastic disbelief, acknowledging that in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, the premise might have come across as ridiculous, but that Del Toro's involvement gave him confidence the finished product would be something special. Reflecting on the production afterward, Kaczynski described his time on Pacific Rim and specifically playing Chuck as among the most enjoyable experiences of his life. Max Martini played Herc Hansen, Chuck's father and co-pilot. Kaczynski has recounted that Martini was initially unhappy about being cast as his character's father, given that the two actors are only 13 years apart in age, but that the pair grew genuinely close during filming, spending their evenings having dinner together and working out at the gym on days off. Kaczynski credited this real friendship with making an emotionally difficult father-son farewell scene easier to play, since his affection for Martini as a person translated naturally into the material. He also revealed that the idea of giving Herc and Chuck a pet bulldog originated with Del Toro, explaining that the dog, whose name in the story was also Max, became a device through which the emotionally reserved father and son could express affection. They struggled to show one another directly. Notably, the role of Herc had originally been written with Ron Perlman in mind, but Del Toro ultimately decided that pairing Perlman's Herc against Hunnam's Raleigh risked feeling too similar to the dynamic of the television series Sons of Anarchy, and changed course accordingly. Clifton Collins Jr. played Tendo Choi, a Jaeger technician of mixed Chinese and South American descent, whom Collins has described as functioning as the technical brains behind the Jaeger program. Bern Gorman played Dr. Hermann Gottlieb, a scientist working alongside Geisler, whom Del Toro characterized as a tweed wearing, phlegmatic, and introverted Englishman who almost never leaves the laboratory. The friction between Gottlieb's cautious modesty and Geisler's brash arrogance was intended to echo one of the film's broader themes about incompatible personalities being forced to function together when circumstances demand it. Drew Atkins portrays a young Gottlieb. Diego Clattenhoff played Yancey Becket, Raleigh's older brother and original co-pilot. Clattenhoff has said he joined the project specifically for the chance to work with Del Toro and described his character as someone looking out for a younger, more eager brother, with the two of them having been granted an extraordinary gift that placed them in a position to help save the world. Tyler Stevenson plays a young Yancey. The supporting cast rounds out the film's ensemble considerably. Charles Liu, Lance Liu, and Mark Liu play the Wei Tang tank triplets, the pilots of the Chinese Jaeger, while Robert Milet and Heather Doxson play Sasha and Alexis Kaidonovsky, the married Russian pilot duo. Joe Pinger appears as the captain of a fishing boat caught in the crossfire of a Jaeger Kaiju battle, and Santiago Segura plays an aide to Hannibal Chow. Brad William Henke and Larry Joe Campbell portray members of the Alaskan construction crew that Raleigh joins after leaving the Jaeger program. Robin Thomas, Julian Barnes, and David Richmond Peck, respectively, portray United Nations representatives from the United States, Great Britain, and Canada. Additional smaller roles include Sebastian Pigot as a Jaeger engineer, Joshua Peace as an officer, Jonathan Foxon as a panicked civilian, David Fox as an elderly man seen on a beach, and Jane Watson, who portrays Raleigh and Yancey's mother in a flashback. Producer Thomas Tull makes a brief cameo appearance in the film as well. In a playful nod to earlier work, voice actress Ellen McLean provides the vocal performance of Gypsy Danger's onboard artificial intelligence, a reference to her well-known role voicing GLaDOS in the Portal video game series. Thematically, Del Toro built the film's dramatic engine around the concept of drifting, the psychic link required for two pilots to jointly operate the neural load of a single Jaeger, because drifting forces pilots to instantly and involuntarily absorb each other's memories and emotions. Del Toro found the concept rich with dramatic possibility, and he has spoken about wanting this metaphor of forced empathy to resonate beyond the fiction of the film itself. He has framed the relationships among the pilots as a larger allegory for the idea that people are, in effect, all sharing same robot in real life, and that the only real choice available to humanity is to either find a way to get along or to perish. He was careful to note that he did not want the film's message to come across as some kind of jingoistic recruitment tool, emphasizing instead that its underlying idea was simply about learning to trust one another and to set aside differences of race, sex, or belief in order to work together. Del Toro acknowledged that this message might read as somewhat simplistic, but said he wished more adventure films had carried a similar moral message when he was a child. All 10 of the film's principal characters were given smaller personal arcs meant to reinforce this idea, and Del Toro has framed the film's broader philosophy in blunt terms. The person you were fighting with only minutes earlier might well be the person you have to cooperate with only minutes later. And true completeness, in his view, only comes from working together. He drew a connective line between this theme and similar ideas present in his earlier films, Hellboy and The Devil's Backbone, noting that while both films carried comparable messages, they did so in very different ways. The relationship between Raleigh Becket and Mako Mori sits at the emotional center of the film, though Del Toro was insistent that it not be read as a conventional romance. Both characters are portrayed as deeply wounded individuals who have each learned to bury significant personal trauma, and the process of learning to co-pilot a Jaeger together forces them to open up to one another, gaining unwilling access to each other's private memories and secrets. Their bond is defined less by romantic attraction than by mutual respect and what has been described as a state of perfect trust. Hunnam has summarized the dynamic as a love story that never quite arrives at love itself, containing all of the emotional prerequisites for romance without the romance ever actually materializing. Because both characters carry significant personal tragedy, one of the screenplay's central ideas holds that two sufficiently damaged people can, in a sense, become whole again by combining their broken pieces, almost like matching fragments of a puzzle. To emphasize the gradual shift from indifference to genuine emotional intimacy between the two characters, Del Toro chose to film their early training combat sequence using techniques more typically associated with a courtship dance scene. Del Toro, who describes himself as a committed pacifist, deliberately avoided the visual language he associates with car commercial aesthetics or military recruitment videos. This extended even to small details like the film's rank structure. Rather than assigning the characters conventional military titles such as captain, major, or general, he gave them titles drawn from Western genre tradition, such as marshal and ranger. He has been explicit that he wanted to avoid sending any message suggesting that war itself is something positive, noting that there is already more than enough firepower in the world without a blockbuster film glorifying it. Del Toro also wanted to break from what he saw as an increasingly common trend in contemporary blockbuster filmmaking, wherein mass civilian death and destruction are depicted almost casually. He made a conscious point of showing evacuations taking place before kaiju attacks strike populated areas, ensuring that the destruction on screen carries no casual undertone of remorseless carnage involving unseen civilian casualties. He has spoken about wanting audiences to experience the same uncomplicated joy he once felt watching a Godzilla style monster toss aside a military tank without needing to dwell on the implication that there might be soldiers inside that tank. He described the film as existing in something close to its own self contained reality, disconnected from any real world anxieties about global instability or the fear that footage of a kaiju attack might somehow inspire a copycat incident, situating his approach instead within a much older tradition, one that began in the years immediately following World War II, when Japanese giant monster films served as a kind of collective coping mechanism for a nation working through the trauma of that conflict, with the destructive rampage of the monster serving an almost ritual function within that tradition. Writing for the Los Angeles Review of Books, scholar Y. Chi Dimok connected the film's recurring visual motif of missing or mismatched shoes to its overarching theme of unity, suggesting that the underlying utopian aspiration driving the characters is the idea that people, however small and insignificant individually, might genuinely be able to come together not only through the specific neural bond required between Jaeger co pilots, but through a broader, almost fractal pattern of resemblance running throughout humanity at every scale. Turning to the visual and conceptual design of the film, Del Toro was adamant that Pacific Rim honors the kaiju and mecha genres that inspired it while still standing as an original work in its own right, rather than functioning as a pastiche, a straightforward homage, or a greatest hits compilation of past genre touchstones. He insisted that his design team begin entirely from scratch, deliberately avoiding any direct emulation of or reference to prior examples within those genres. He specifically warned his designers away from looking to films like the original Godzilla series, Gamera, or The War of the Gargantuas for inspiration, explaining that he had no interest in being postmodern or referential or in simply slotting the film into an established genre lineage. Instead, his stated goal was to create something new that was nonetheless deeply, almost helplessly in love with the genre traditions it drew from, aiming to imbue the project with epic beauty, dramatic weight, and what he called operatic grandeur. Rather than looking to popular culture for inspiration, Del Toro instead drew from fine art, citing works such as the painting The Colossus and the boxing themed paintings of George Bellows as touchstones. The film's design team included Wayne Barlow, who served as the primary designer of the kaiju themselves, along with Oscar Ciccione, monster sculptors David Meng and Simon Lee, and Francisco Ruiz Velasco, a designer who had previously worked on Hellboy 2 and the Hobbit film series. Del Toro has acknowledged that certain designs originally created for the cancelled at the Mountains of Madness adaptation may have found their way into Pacific Rim's creature and environment work. The design process was notably rigorous and iterative. Approximately 100 distinct kaiju designs and roughly 100 Jaeger designs were created over the course of pre-production, though only a small fraction of these ultimately appeared in the finished film. Every week, the filmmaking team would hold what Del Toro described as their own informal version of an American Idol competition, voting to determine which designs were strong enough to survive. When it came to designing the kaiju specifically, the creative team frequently drew inspiration from real world biology and natural history rather than from other films. Del Toro has explained that although the kaiju are outlandish by definition, they were conceived as belonging to loose families in the way that real animals do. Some more reptilian, some more insect like, others closer to crustaceans, and that applying careful, quasi scientific attention to anatomical detail made an otherwise fantastical design feel more grounded and interesting. At the same time, Del Toro was careful to keep the kaiju from resembling any single existing Earth creature too closely, opting instead to make them feel genuinely otherworldly and alien. He has described the kaiju in blunt, almost mercenary terms as weapons, likening them to a cleaning crew or to cats sent into a warehouse specifically to exterminate vermin. Certain shared design elements recur across all of the kaiju designs, a deliberate choice meant to visually suggest that they are connected to one another and were engineered toward a common purpose. And each creature was given a vaguely humanoid silhouette as a nod to the man in a suit aesthetic that defined early Japanese kaiju filmmaking. Unlike the monsters that populate many of Del Toro's other films, which frequently bear scars or visible signs of some prior history or culture. The kaiju of Pacific Rim are conspicuously free of such markings, reinforcing the idea that they are engineered creations rather than products of a natural evolutionary process. Individual creature designs carried their own specific inspirations. Knifehead, the first kaiju to appear on screen, was conceived as a deliberate tribute to the somewhat plodding, deliberately paced kaiju of 1960s Japanese cinema, designed to evoke the look of a performer in a rubber suit with a head shape drawn from that of a goblin shark. Leatherback, the hulking, bouncer like kaiju capable of unleashing electromagnetic pulse attacks, was reportedly a personal favorite of Del Toro's. He conceived the creature as a kind of brawler with an exaggerated beer belly, and its lumbering movement patterns were modeled on the way gorillas move. Otaji, another of the film's kaiju, was designed as a nod to dragons from Chinese mythology. Del Toro described it as functioning like a Swiss army knife of a creature given nearly 20 minutes of total screen time and a correspondingly wide array of distinguishing features so that audiences would not grow tired of watching it. Otachi moves through water somewhat like a Komodo dragon, possesses multiple sets of jaws and an acid-filled sac in its neck, and can unfurl wings when needed. It is also depicted as noticeably more intelligent than the other kaiju, employing tactics against the Jaegers modeled loosely on eagle hunting behavior. Onibaba, the kaiju responsible for orphaning Mako Mori as a child, was designed to resemble a fusion between a traditional Japanese temple structure and a crustacean. Slattern, the largest kaiju to appear in the film and the first Category 5 threat depicted on screen, is distinguished by an unusually elongated neck and a head designed Del Toro described as part horn and part crown, a combination he considered simultaneously demonic and regal. The Jaegers received equally deliberate design treatment. Gypsy Danger, the American Jaeger and the film's central maker, was modeled on the geometric shapes found in New York City's Art Deco architecture, drawing specifically from buildings like the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building, while its physical movement was influenced by John Wayne's distinctive gunslinger gait and hip motion. Cherno Alpha, the Russian Jaeger, borrowed its shape and paint scheme from Soviet-era T-series tanks, combined with a massive containment silo design intended to give the impression of a walking nuclear power plant, complete with a cooling tower positioned atop its head. Crimson Typhoon, the three-armed Chinese Jaeger, piloted by a set of triplets, was designed to resemble a medieval warrior figure with a surface texture meant to evoke Chinese lacquered wood accented with golden edges. Striker Eureka, the Australian Jaeger, was compared by Del Toro to a Land Rover, conceived as the most elegant and overtly masculine of the four main Jaegers. It features a jutting chest design, a camouflage paint scheme evocative of the Australian outback, and a general sense of swagger meant to mirror the bravado of its pilots. The elaborate launch sequences depicting the Jaegers being deployed for battle were directly inspired by the similarly intricate launch sequences featured in the classic British television series Thunderbirds. Costume design fell to Shane Mahan and Kate Hawley, who spent several months developing the pilot suits worn by the Jaeger crews. The Russian pilots, in particular, were given deliberately old fashioned suits meant to evoke the look of vintage cosmonaut space gear. For visual effects, Del Toro selected Industrial Light and Magic (ILM), bringing on Academy Award winners John Knoll and Halty Hickel, both of whom had previously worked on the Star Wars prequel trilogy and the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Shane Mahan, co-owner of Legacy Effects and previously responsible for the armored suits seen in Iron Man, was tasked with physically constructing the pilot suits, helmets, and cockpit interiors known as cornpods. Academy Award winner Clay Pinney, whose credits include Independence Day and the 2009 Star Trek film, also joined the effects team. Additional visual effects work was contributed by Hybrid Technologies, a division of Ubisoft, and by Rodeo FX. Del Toro's conceptual pitch to the effects team at ILM emphasized theatricality above all else. He has recalled telling the team at the outset that the film needed to feel theatrical, operatic, and romantic, deliberately reaching for language not typically associated with high tech summer blockbusters. For the climactic battle sequence set in Hong Kong, the team pursued an intensely saturated color palette, with Del Toro repeatedly asking his effects supervisor to lean into a richly saturated treatment of greens, purples, pinks, and oranges. The classic Japanese woodblock print, The Great Wave of Kanagawa by Hokusai, became a recurring visual touchstone for the film's ocean based combat sequences. Del Toro has recalled frequently asking his team to recreate the specific character of a Hokusai wave, treating the film's water and weather effects with an almost operatic sensibility. He also encouraged his lighting supervisor not to worry excessively about matching lighting continuity from shot to shot, acknowledging this as an unorthodox approach for a major effects driven film, but one he felt produced results that were more artistically free and visually powerful than a conventional, tightly matched approach would have allowed. Del Toro has singled out the film's digital water simulation as its single most exciting visual effects achievement, describing the water dynamics as both technically impressive and artistically expressive, and noting that the team treated water almost as its own character within the story, timing individual wave movements with great precision. Beyond the purely digital effects work, the film also made extensive use of physical miniature effects handled by 32TTN Studios under the supervision of ILM visual effects producer Susan Greenhow, alongside visual effects supervisors John Knoll and Lindy DeQuattro. Shot using Red Epic cameras mounted on 3D rigs, these miniature sequences included the construction of a quarter-scale office building interior that was destroyed by a pneumatically controlled Jaeger fist rig as well as a sequence depicting rows of stadium seating being violently blown apart as a Jaeger crash lands, achieved through quarter scale seating destroyed with air cannons. Beyond these dedicated miniature sequences, 32TN also supplied a variety of practical elements that were later incorporated into ILM's digital compositing work, including dust clouds, shattering glass, and additional water effects. Filming principal photography on Pacific Rim began on November 14, 2011 in Toronto and continued through April 2012, with Del Toro providing an update to press after the production's second week of shooting had wrapped. During filming, the project operated under the working titles Silent Seas and Still Seas, likely as a means of maintaining some discretion around the production. The shooting schedule itself was unusually demanding, even by Del Toro's own standards. He had never previously shot a film in fewer than 115 days, yet Pacific Rim afforded him only 103 days to complete principal photography. To manage this compressed timeline, Del Toro arranged for a splinter secondary unit that he personally directed early each morning before the main unit began its work, as well as on his scheduled days off from the primary shoot. By his own account, Del Toro worked between 17 and 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, for much of the production schedule. Despite the grueling pace, Del Toro adopted a somewhat different approach to directing his actors than he had used previously, allowing for looser, more improvisational performance on set. At the same time, he maintained extremely tight creative control over virtually every other aspect of the production, later explaining that everything eventually passed through him in one way or another, and that he simply did not delegate, acknowledging that this approach did not suit everyone's working style, but insisting it was nonetheless the only way he knew how to make the film properly. Technically, the film was shot using Red Epic digital cameras. Del Toro's initial plan called for the film to be shot and presented entirely in conventional 2D, foregoing a 3D presentation altogether. His reasoning centered on the sheer scale of the film's robots and monsters. He explained that when depicting objects as enormous as two buildings positioned 300 feet apart, ordinary camera movement produces essentially no parallax effect, meaning that even fast camera movement would barely register any noticeable 3D depth. He further argued that forcing a 3D treatment onto subjects intended to feel truly massive would have the paradoxal effect of making them seem smaller, since achieving convincing 3D depth for such large objects would require rendering their perspective on a more human, and therefore less awe inspiring, scale. Despite these reservations, it was later announced that the film would in fact be converted to 3D after all, a process that ultimately took roughly 40 weeks longer than a typical post production 3D conversion. Del Toro addressed the apparent reversal candidly. joking that he had simply changed his mind, noting that unlike a politician, he was not running for office and so was free to reverse a public position without the same scrutiny. Post-production Del Toro's editing process for Pacific Rim involved cutting approximately an hour of material from the finished film. Much of the excised footage delved more deeply into individual characters and their personal arcs, but Del Toro ultimately felt that trimming this material was necessary to maintain the right balance for the film as a whole. He was candid about the limits of the material's ambitions, remarking that the production could not reasonably pretend to be staging an Ibsen play populated with monsters and giant robots, and that he had no illusions about the film functioning as some kind of profound meditation on the human condition. Each character's individual arc was consequently edited down to what Del Toro considered its essential minimum. The director was also mindful of pacing for younger audience members and wanted to keep the finished film's runtime in the vicinity of 2 hours. Notably, Del Toro brought in two of his fellow acclaimed filmmakers, Alejandro González Iñárritu and Alfonso Cuarón, to assist with the editing process. Iñárritu is credited with removing roughly 10 additional minutes of footage from the cut, while Cuarón trimmed a somewhat smaller amount of material described as only a few additional minutes, and also helped rearrange the order of several scenes. In recognition of their contributions, both Iñárritu and Cuarón received a special thanks credit in the film's closing credits alongside James Cameron and David Cronenberg, both of whom are likewise thanked in the credits. The specific nature of Cameron's contribution to the production remains unclear, but Del Toro has explained that Cronenberg provided substantial informal assistance in helping to staff the Toronto-based production with local crew members. Del Toro approached the overall tone of the finished film as an earnest, colorful adventure story, deliberately cultivating what he described as an incredibly airy and light feeling, in conscious contrast to the brooding, dark, and cynical tone he associated with many contemporary summer blockbusters. His focus throughout post-production remained on delivering big, beautiful, and visually sophisticated set pieces along with action sequences substantial enough to satisfy an adult audience, even as he has stated that his deeper hope for the film was to introduce an entirely new generation of younger viewers to the kaiju and mecha genres. Although the film draws heavily on those genre traditions, Del Toro was careful throughout post-production, as in earlier stages of the project, to avoid direct or overt references to specific prior works within those genres, aiming instead to craft something that felt genuinely original while still being unmistakably devoted to its influences, carrying what he described as both epic beauty and operatic grandeur. In a gesture that made this lineage explicit, the film's closing credits dedicate the movie to Ray Harryhausen and Ishiro Honda, two towering figures credited with helping to establish the giant monster genre through works such as The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the original 1954 Godzilla, respectively. Music The film's musical score was composed by Ramin Djawadi. Del Toro explained his reasoning for selecting Djawadi by pointing to the composer's earlier work on the television series Prison Break, the 2008 film Iron Man, and the television series Game of Thrones, noting that Djawadi's scores consistently carried a sense of grandeur paired with what he described as an incredible sort of human soul. Del Toro additionally indicated during the film's development that some Russian rap music would be incorporated into the finished soundtrack alongside Jawadi's orchestral score. The film soundtrack was made available as a digital download through Amazon beginning on June 18, 2013, with a CD release following on June 25, 2013. A physical release of the soundtrack arrived via Water Tower Music on July 9, 2013, positioned just 3 days ahead of the film's own theatrical release. The score featured guest musicians Tom Morello and Priscilla Ann, both of whom performed as featured soloists on portions of the recording. Two songs that appear within the finished film were notably absent from the official soundtrack release, Just Like Your Tenderness, performed by Luo Xiaoxuan, and the film's end title song, Drift, performed by Blake Pullman featuring R. Zai. Critical reception of the soundtrack album itself skewed positive. The website The Action Elite awarded the score a perfect 5-star rating, while Empire magazine rated it 4 stars out of 5. Both MSN's and the specialist score review outlet Filmtracks likewise rated the soundtrack 4 stars out of 5. On the commercial side, the soundtrack reached a peak position of number 7 on the Billboard Top Soundtracks chart during the week of July 27, 2013. Release theatrical marketing for Pacific Rim began building well ahead of the film's eventual theatrical release. On November 28, 2012, the official film website went live alongside two viral marketing videos, one of which depicted an early kaiju attack as though it had been captured on a civilian's handheld camera. Around the same time, blueprint style images detailing the design of the various Jaeger machines were also released online as part of the promotional rollout. Tie-in media accompanied the marketing campaign as it ramped up closer to release. On June 5, 2013, a graphic novel titled Pacific Rim Tales from Year Zero was published, written by Travis Beacham and featuring cover artwork by the well known comics artist Alex Ross. The graphic novel functions as an introductory prologue to the events of the film, set roughly 12 years prior to the story depicted on screen. On June 18, Insight Editions published a companion art book titled Pacific Rim Man, Machines, and Monsters, written by David S. Cohen and featuring a foreword contributed by Del Toro himself. The book chronicles the film's production through a combination of concept art, on-set photography, and first-hand accounts from members of the cast and crew. On July 2nd, an additional viral video was released in which Ron Perlman, appearing in character as Hannibal Chow, advertised a fictional kaiju organ dealership called Kaiju Remedies as part of the ongoing marketing push. On the day of the film's actual theatrical release, July 12, 2013, yet another promotional video was released, this one produced through a collaboration between the studio Del Toro himself and the YouTube network then known as Polaris, or alternately as the Game Station. This particular video featured well-known members of that YouTube network, including the popular gaming duo behind Game Grumps, cast in the roles of fictional Jaeger pilots battling Kaiju. Additional tie-in products followed the theatrical release closely. On July 16, a novelization of the film written by Alex Irvine was published, and the toy company NECA began selling a line of action figures depicting the film's various kaiju and Jaegers. The film's theatrical release date itself shifted more than once during the course of production and marketing. Pacific Rim was initially expected to arrive in theaters on July 12, 2013, but Warner Bros. Subsequently decided to move the release date up significantly to May 10, 2013. That earlier date did not ultimately hold. However, in March 2012, it was announced that the studio had reversed course and would instead release the film on its original planned date of July 12, 2013. Ahead of its wide release, the film held its premiere in Mexico City on July 1, 2013. Home Media Pacific Rim first became available to consumers through digital storefronts, arriving on the iTunes Store and on Vudu for digital download and rental beginning October 1, 2013. Physical home media releases followed shortly after. The film arrived on DVD, standard Blu-ray, and Blu-ray 3D in the United States on October 15, 2013, with the United Kingdom and a number of other international markets receiving their own physical releases somewhat later on November 25, 2013. A separate collector's edition package was made available on that same October 15 release date for the North American market. The home media rollout was accompanied by its own small promotional gesture rooted in fan culture to help generate additional buzz ahead of the disc release. Brian Harley and Roque Rodriguez, two filmmakers based in Fresno, California, produced a low-budget, Swedish recreation of the film's battle between Gypsy Danger and the Kaiju Otachi. Del Toro had reportedly been impressed by an earlier Swedish trailer the pair had released on YouTube back in March 2013, which appears to have led to this further collaboration timed around the disc release. In terms of raw sales performance, industry tracking indicated that as of March 2014, Pacific Rim had sold 961,845 units on DVD along with 1,427, 692 unit on Blu-ray within the United States alone, generating approximately 10,45,530 in DVD revenue and 24,634,992 in Blu-ray revenue, for a combined domestic home media total of roughly 37,079,122. Years later, the film received a further home media upgrade when it was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray on October 4, 2016, allowing it to be experienced in 4K resolution with high dynamic range on compatible home displays. Reception box office Pacific Rim carried a production budget of $190 million and ultimately grossed a worldwide total of approximately $411 million. Of that total, the film earned $101 million in North America, with the remaining $319.6 million coming from international markets, reflecting a release pattern in which the film performed dramatically better abroad than it did domestically. The film's opening weekend in North America told much of that story. Thursday night preview showings brought in $3.6 million, with roughly 23% of that figure coming specifically from IMAX screenings. The film then found itself facing stiff competition from the comedy sequel Grown Ups 2, ultimately falling behind that film on opening day and earning $18.6 million for its first day in North American theaters. Over the course of its full opening weekend, Pacific Rim landed in third place at the domestic box office, with a gross of $37.2 million, trailing both Despicable Me 2 and Grown Ups 2. Even so, this figure represented the highest opening weekend of Del Toro's directing career up to that point, surpassing the previous high set by Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. Roughly half of all opening weekend tickets sold were for 3D screenings, making Pacific Rim the film with the second highest share of 3D ticket sales for the year 2013, trailing only Gravity. The film's domestic performance dropped off relatively quickly after its opening. During its second weekend in North American theaters, Pacific Rim saw a steep 57% decline in box office revenue, bringing in $16 million. The decline continued into its third weekend, during which the film dropped a further 52% to gross $7.7 million. While the film's domestic trajectory was underwhelming relative to its budget, its international performance told a markedly different story. On July 22, 2013, it was reported that Pacific Rim had claimed the top spot at the international box office for that particular weekend. China proved to be an especially important market for the film. Its opening in China brought in $45.2 million, a figure that stood as the largest opening ever for a Warner Bros. Release in that country and the sixth largest opening weekend for any Hollywood film in Chinese box office history up to that point, though the film's overall China run was later overtaken by The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. On August 19, 2013, the film's cumulative gross in China crossed the $100 million threshold, making it the sixth highest grossing American film in Chinese box office history at that time. By the end of its run, Pacific Rim had grossed a total of $136.4 million in China, making the country by a wide margin the single largest individual market for the film worldwide. Japan proved comparatively less enthusiastic. The film opened in fifth place at the Japanese box office, earning an initial $3 million, trailing narrowly behind the $4 million opening posted by World War Z during the same frame. The unusual gap between the film's soft domestic performance and its considerable international success drew specific commentary from financial and entertainment press. In September 2013, Forbes highlighted Pacific Rim as a rare example of an English language film that managed to cross the $400 million mark worldwide while barely reaching $100 million domestically, framing it as an unusual case study in how a film's commercial fate could diverge so sharply between its home market and the rest of the world. Ultimately, thanks largely to its performance in China and other international territories, Pacific Rim became Guillermo del Toro's most commercially successful film to that point in his career. Critical response Pacific Rim was met with generally positive reviews from critics upon its release. On the review aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a 72% approval rating based on 294 collected reviews with an average rating of 6.6 out of 10. The site's official critical consensus describes the film as favoring style over substance to some degree while still characterizing it overall as a solid modern creature feature elevated by striking visual imagery and an irresistible sense of fun. On Metacritic, which aggregates and weights critical reviews differently, the film holds a score of 65 out of 100 based on 48 collected reviews, and Vasal site classifies as indicating generally favorable reviews. Audience reaction, as measured through cinema score polling of opening weekend moviegoers, gave the film an average grade of A minus on the service's letter grade scale running from A plus to F. Many individual critics praised the film enthusiastically. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph awarded the film a full 5 stars out of 5, comparing the experience of watching it to rediscovering a beloved cartoon from childhood. Colin praised Del Toro specifically for channeling his own genuine affection for the genre and his sense of artistry into the project in a way that pulled viewers into the film's world rather than leaving them observing from a distance. Noting that the director had managed to cater successfully to both younger and older audiences simultaneously, and expressing some surprise that the finished film managed to exceed the sum of its individual parts. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter also reviewed the film favorably, framing it as essentially fulfilling the accumulated promise that every prior monster movie had ever attempted but never quite achieved. Drew McQueenie, writing for Hitfix, focused much of his praise on the film's production design and overall art direction, additionally commending the cinematography for capturing the film's tone effectively and describing the musical score in strongly positive terms. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone characterized the film as the product of a genuine humanist determined to trade cynicism for compassion, crediting Del Toro with driving the film's action sequences with real emotional pulse. Keith Ulick, writing for Time Out, described the film as a work of purely pleasurable comic book absurdity and noted that Del Toro had managed to lend the proceedings a level of believable humanity that Olick felt was largely absent from most of the other destruction heavy blockbusters released that same summer. He singled out the film's treatment of kaiju attacks on ordinary civilians as making a genuinely personal emotional impression on viewers and specifically highlighted a scene involving Mako Mori as being as emotionally resonant as anything found in mecha anime such as Neon Genesis Evangelion, a genre touchstone he felt Del Toro had emulated with real skill. Stephanie Zacharek of The Village Voice described the film as summer entertainment with genuine energy behind it, praising its action sequences as gloriously unpretentious and free of any elitist condescension, though she did note that the story itself was fairly predictable and suggested Del Toro's talents might have been better spent on projects with more visionary ambitions. Angela Watercutter, writing for Wired, called the film the most exciting movie of the summer season, describing it as a fist pumping, awe inspiring ride and argued that its clear prioritization of spectacle over deep characterization simply did not matter within the broader context of a summer blockbuster. Richard Roper awarded the film a B grade, offering the somewhat cheeky observation that either the film's Jaegers or its Kaiju would be capable of overpowering the robots from the Transformers film franchise. Leonard Maltin gave the film 2.5 stars out of a possible four, characterizing it as amounting to roughly three quarters of a genuinely good movie that ultimately did not know when to stop. Not every critic was won over, however, and the film also drew a substantial amount of more mixed or negative commentary. Andrew Pulver of The Guardian offered a comparatively lukewarm assessment, describing the film as a combination of thin psychological drama and dialogue that felt mechanically generated purely to advance the plot. Richard Corliss of Time felt that the film's action sequences were undercut by lifeless dramatic material, memorably summarizing the film as roughly 45 minutes of genuinely exciting spectacle wrapped inside 90 minutes of tedium. Justin Chang of Variety criticized the film for being excessively loud and for lacking the nuance and subtlety that had characterized Del Toro's earlier directorial work. Anthony Lane of The New Yorker offered a similarly skeptical assessment, suggesting that while one could reasonably applaud the film for the effectiveness of its underlying commercial formula, the actual narrative it produced struck him as long loud, dark, and thoroughly waterlogged, comparing the experience unfavorably to watching an elephant give birth. Nick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle delivered one of the harshest reviews the film received, expressing genuine dismay that a film of this kind could resonate so strongly with audiences and suggesting with evident sarcasm that filmmaking might as well be handed over to alien monsters if this represented the best cinema had to offer. LaSalle specifically lamented what he saw as a decline for Del Toro, a director he associated with the more artistically ambitious and discerning work of Pan's Labyrinth, arguing that Del Toro had become too reliant on computer generated spectacle and questioning why audiences would want to spend a trip to the movies looking at someone else's computer generated imagery after already spending an entire week staring at their own screens. Ed Gonzalez of Slant magazine likewise expressed reservations, arguing the film lacked genuine poignancy and comparing its structure to that of a video game, describing it as a stylish but fundamentally formulaic march toward an inevitable final boss encounter. Alonso Duralde of The Rap criticized the filmmaker's decision to stage most of the film's major battles at night or in heavy rain, arguing that this choice undercut the visual clarity of the action while also suggesting that the film's comic relief performers, Day, Gorman, and Pullman, effectively stole the movie away from its comparatively less compelling central leads. Jordan Hoffman of Film Com was particularly unimpressed with Charlie Hunnam's performance, describing the actor as something close to a charisma vacuum at the center of the film. Giles Hardy of the Sydney Morning Herald was among the most critical reviewers of all, sarcastically awarding the film's action sequences a rating of 5 IQ points out of 5 and characterizing the overall film as roughly an hour and 20 minutes of fight choreography loosely stitched together by only about 10 minutes of actual plot. The film also generated a distinctive wave of enthusiasm from other filmmakers and creative figures working within genres closely related to its own subject matter. Director Rian Johnson offered praise for the film, and Japanese video game director Hideo Kojima went further still, calling it the ultimate film for devoted genre fans or otaku, and stating that he had never expected to be fortunate enough to see a film quite like it during his lifetime. Go Nagai, the influential creator widely credited with pioneering the concept of a mecha piloted from an interior cockpit, praised the film's sense of fun and the intensity of its action sequences, while video game developer Fumito Ueda remarked that the film's battle sequences surpassed even his own cherished childhood memories of watching Japanese tokusatsu films. Science fiction author William Gibson offered particularly effusive praise, describing the film as a ravishing showcase of intelligent and often wonderfully witty visual design, with every frame given over to a coherent visual language in service of what he considered, at its emotional core, a children's story, and crucially, in his assessment, a baroque piece of filmmaking that never curdled into excess or became overly enamored with its own style. Beyond individual reviews, Pacific Rim also left a lasting mark on broader critical and cultural discourse through the creation of the so-called Mako Mori test. Named directly after Rinko Kikuchi's character, the Mako Mori test emerged as a set of informal criteria intended to measure a baseline level of gender equality within a given film or television show. Conceived partly as a response to and variation on the earlier, more widely known Bechdel test. The concept originated from an observation that despite Pacific Rim offering what many viewers considered a genuinely strong and well realized female character in Mako Mori, the film nevertheless technically fails the Bechdel test's specific criteria. The Mako Mori test instead asks only that a given work contain at least one female character who possesses her own independent narrative arc, one that exists separately from serving as support for a male character's story. This alternative framework has since been cited and debated extensively in broader conversations about representation and character development in genre filmmaking, standing as one of the more unusual and enduring pieces of cultural legacy to emerge from the film's critical reception.